The Battle of Carbisdale took place close to the village of Coleraine on the 27th of April 1650 and was part of the Wars of the Three Kingdoms. It was fought by the Royalist leader James Graham, 1st Marquess of Montrose, against the Scottish government of the time, dominated by Archibald Campbell, 1st Marquess of Argyll, and a grouping of radical Covenanters, known as the Kirk Party. The battlefield has been inventoried and protected by Historic Scotland under the Scottish Historical Environment Policy of 2009. Charles and Montrose. After the execution of Charles I in January 1649, Scotland entered a period of complex political manoeuvring. His son was immediately proclaimed as Charles II in Edinburgh, though it was soon to be made clear to him that if he were ever to exercise real power he would be obliged to subscribe to a radical Presbyterian agenda. Amongst other things, he would be required to take the Covenants of 1638 and 1643, a move his father had always resisted. In exile at The Hague, Charles was anxious to take the quickest way back to the throne. He initially favoured calling on the assistance of the Catholic Irish authorities at Kilkenny, until this option was removed by Oliver Cromwell in the summer of 1649. In falling back on the Covenanters, Charles hoped to put them in a more accommodating frame of mind. One way of doing this was to take the advice of the ultra-royalist James Graham, 1st Marquess of Montrose, who had led a military campaign against the Covenanters in 1644 and 1645, enjoying some notable successes. On the 22nd of February 1649, Charles appointed Montrose as Lieutenant Governor of Scotland and Captain General of all of his forces there. Although he was about to receive a deputation from the government in Edinburgh, he was prepared to listen to Montrose's more militant advice, especially as there were already some stirrings against the Covenanters in northern Scotland. Landing in Orkney. Throughout the course of the year, Montrose kept busy using his commission in an attempt to raise troops and money in the German state of Brandenburg, as well as Sweden and Denmark. This met with limited success, but by September he had managed to raise and equip a small force of 80 officers and 100 Danish soldiers. Under the leadership of the Earl of Kinnoul, these men were sent as an advance party to occupy the Orkney Isles, charged with recruiting local forces, while Montrose remained on the continent employing professional troops. In March 1650, Montrose came in person, landing at Kirkwall with some more foreign mercenaries to join his advance party and the Orcadian levies. Amongst his officers was Sir John Urry, his old opponent at the Battle of Waldern in 1645. Altogether he had 40 horse, 500 mercenaries and 700 Orcadians, completely unskilled in the arts of war. On board his ship, the Herderinnen, anchored in Scapa Flow, Montrose issued his orders to Urry at a conference on the 9th of April. He was instructed to cross to Caithness that same evening with part of the little army and advance toward of Caithness, a high hill overhanging the sea just north of Kildonan. Montrose crossed with the rest of his force a few days later. Montrose had heard that the local Highland Scottish clans of Clan Monro, Clan Ross and Clan Mackenzie were up in arms and were likely to join him, although as it turned out, they did not. Montrose hoped to meet up with the Clan Monro in Clan Ross. When none of the clans arrived, he pressed on the Strathor Kellen into the narrow valley of Carbisdale. For 2 days he waited in the valley for the Munros and Rosses. Waiting for them was his biggest mistake, as the clans had sided with the Scottish government, and Argyll had already set to his counterplans in Operation Strachan's Ride. In Edinburgh, the Committee of Estates, the executive authority of the Scottish Parliament, was soon aware that Montrose had crossed to the mainland. General David Leslie, Lord Newark, was instructed to take his forces north to prevent this incursion from developing into a major rising. A rendezvous was held at Brecon on the 25th of April. From here, Colonel Archibald Strachan was sent ahead to gather the cavalry that had wintered in the north. He now had 5 troops of horse under his command, including 3 that had been with him at the rout of an anti-Covenanter army at Balvenie Castle near Dufftown in May 1649. This episode, known as the Ford of Balvenie, convinced Strachan and the more extreme Covenanters that all that was needed to disperse the mighty was a small band of righteous men, after the example of Gideon in the Book of Judges. Strachan now rode on to Rossshire, convinced that victory was already his. Montrose moved south. Montrose joined Hurry at the Ord of Caithness. From here their combined force advanced along the coast to Dunrobin Castle, garrisoned for the government by the tenants of the Earl of Sutherland, as were the smaller fortresses at Skelbo Castle, Skibber Castle and Dornick Castle. Avoiding these obstacles, the Royalists turned aside, marching up Strathfleet towards Strathoykell. The Oikel was forded just to the west of its junction with the Castley, and the trek continued along the southern bank. Montrose had counted on the support of the Mackenzies, but their chief, the Earl of Seaforth, was in exile, and even his brother, Sir Thomas Mackenzie of Plascardine, who led the rising the previous year, remained quiet. With no support in the hills, the rebels continued back towards the coastal plain, halting at Carbisdale on the southern side of the Kyle of Sutherland on the 27th of April. By now Strachan was at Tain conferring with the Earl of Sutherland. Learning of Montrose's whereabouts, he decided on an immediate surprise attack. Carbisdale. Montrose's army was in a narrow glen, where the Coleraine burn flows into the Kyle of Sutherland. To his rear the ground rose, up to the wooded hill of Creagh-Quanachan. With a good view of the surrounding countryside he would be able to deploy his men on the hill if subject to a sudden attack. Yet, believing there was only a small body of enemy horse in the area, he failed to carry out a thorough reconnaissance, thus making the same mistake that led to the disaster at the Battle of Philiphaugh. Strachan had now reached Westerfern to the southeast of Carbisdale. On his onward march he still had the River Carron to cross by a ford which left him some miles short of the enemy position. A direct approach would only alert the Royalists to his position. Fortunately, much of the way was covered by thick broom, which ended just before the Coleraine burn was reached. Close to the burn, Strachan concealed his men in a gully overshadowed by broom, allowing only a single troop to emerge into the open. Montrose sent his cavalry under Major John Lisle to investigate, while the infantry took cover in the woods of Creagh-Quanachan. Before these deployments were complete, Strachan's whole force emerged and charged. Lisle was immediately overwhelmed, as the Covenanters rode on towards the infantry. The Germans and Danes, seeing their cavalry defeated, retreated into nearby Scroggy Wood. Here Clan Munro and Clan Ross joined in the fight, eager to grab their share of any plunder. The Germans and Danes fought gallantly, retreating deeper and deeper into the wood, but they were losing the battle. The need for self-preservation took over, and those that were left attempted to flee, with the bloodshed in the wood continuing for over 2 hours. Even after the battle ended, the slaughter did not cease. The clansmen of Rossshire and Sutherland for many days after continued pursuing and killing those who had escaped the battle. Hurry and some of the Danish and German musketeers attempted to make a stand, but the Orcadians crumbled in panic. 200 of them were drowned trying to escape across the waters of the Kyle of Sutherland. In a matter of minutes the whole affair was over. Carbisdale was not a battle, it was a rout. The defeated soldiers were hunted over the slopes of Creagh-Quanachan by Strachan's troopers and local hostile clansmen for 2 hours. 400 were killed, and over 450 taken prisoner, including Sir John Hurry, whose amazing career as a soldier was shortly to come to an end. Colonel Strachan's scout had been Munro of Lemler, while Montrose's scout had been Robert Munro of Atchness. Historians have speculated whether Munro of Atchness had lured Montrose into a trap by giving him false information. Death of Montrose. Despite his wounds, Montrose managed to escape from the debacle at Carbisdale with help from Major Sinclair. For some days he managed to avoid capture, disguised as a shepherd, until he finally made it to Ardbrek Castle, seat of MacLeod of Assynt. There is a strong tradition that MacLeod had served with Montrose at the siege of Inverness in 1645, and Montrose would have gone there expecting a place of refuge. However, when Montrose arrived, MacLeod was away, and he was met instead by MacLeod's wife, Christian Munro, daughter of Munro of Lemler, who had fought on the opposite side at Carbisdale. Montrose was confined in the vaulted cellars of the castle along with Sinclair, who had been found wandering in the hills. MacLeod took credit for the capture of Montrose. Montrose was taken to Edinburgh, where he was hanged on the 21st of May. After execution, his body was dismembered. The quarters were publicly displayed in Aberdeen, Glasgow, Perth and Stirling, and the head on the Tolbooth in Edinburgh, where it remained for 11 years. With all options now exhausted, Charles took the Covenants, against his conscience and judgment. He arrived in Scotland that summer. Unfortunately for him, so did Cromwell.